Well, he's a big deal because he's been on Chris Farrow Focus. He was on that many years ago. It is Tom Werme. It goes without saying that he has done a ton in this industry and he's giving back a lot as well. Tom, from what he's doing with the ACC and football and basketball with Raycom and also with the PGA Tour. The list goes on. We could be here forever if we're talking about his resume, Syracuse, which is where my soon-to-be wife went. So we have that connection as well, the Syracuse connection. I'm Bryan
Great.
Fenley. Yes. So this is the Onto Something podcast, and I call different sports to different networks, including golf and tennis and volleyball. And Tom, this is a place where we're going to share your story, but learn about the personal side of you as well. I know you've done a lot of interviews, you've done a lot of podcasts. So this will be fun. We'll get a sort of a full circle look at you, the 360 degree. And I know that you might be ready, or maybe you're thinking to yourself, why did I do this? But I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, it's not a big circle. We get that. We'll take care of it. No problem.
So the work that you do, with that comes validation. What part of the validation that you get in this industry means the most to you?
I just like going to the games and documenting whatever the athlete may be that day. Women's basketball, men's basketball, football, golf, whatever it is. I love the drama of the whole scene, being involved in it in some small way, and again, the being able to document it, be the conduit to the viewer, and whether it's in a television, radio, or the multitude of other platforms that we have available today, and in each has its own sort of guidelines, a way of doing things. But when you catch that wonderful moment and you're able to be a part of that and share it with the audience and the everybody that's involved in that event, that to me is the pinnacle of the whole thing. And it just goes back to just wanting to be at the events and experience that. I'm the guy who goes to a baseball game and I want like 15 innings. I mean, and nowadays it's a little quicker, so that's good. But I want the extra innings, I want the overtime, I want to see the wild play. And I don't even necessarily want to if I was attending an event, I don't want to take out my phone and shoot it. I want that to be just for the moment for the people who attended and saw that happen. And then I get to do it on the television and radio side too, and be able to talk about it and be in those circles and just be a visitor to their world every once in a while.
If somebody were to take a camera to you when you're in that moment, that pinnacle that you're talking about, what am I going to see? What am I going to hear from you?
So if you search the internet, the vast reaches of the internet, I did what's called they call it a teen cast, teen stream for the Final Four. And as you mentioned, I went to Syracuse University, and I had a chance to call their appearance in the Final Four, 2016 in Houston, and it was outrageous. It was just they let me strip away all the normal parameters and confines of a 50-50 broadcast and allowed me to basically root for the orange. And so I took it to heart. And it really just kind of came out as if I was sitting there talking about the game, but also being an invested fan as well. And I got to do it the previous year also for Duke, for Turner Sports, when they were doing those side-by-side team casts. And so you might see a little bit of that. But if it's a regular event, and honestly, to me, they're all Super Bowls if I'm there at that moment because somebody cares about it and they've chosen to tune in and watch our broadcast. But and it's funny because if you're on the radio side, you have got to convey that the feeling of the moment through your voice, whereas on the TV side, you kind of hit it a little bit and then let all the pictures and sound supplement that and be its own moment. So there's different ways to do it, but you would see somebody who's, I mean, I come out of my seat in basketball and football and all the other events that I've been able to, I mean, I've done track and field and tennis, and obviously the golf is to me, I know it sounds a little different when you hear that this person calls golf on the radio, but I think if you can make that exciting and make the viewer or the listener really um, join in that moment and get them to experience that through the radio waves or whatever it is, I think that's an accomplishment. And that's what I try to do because I am genuinely excited to be there and to witness that moment.
With that excitement comes a lot of emotions as you're talking about. How often are you're so immersed in this moment, whether it's walking the golf course, whether it's college basketball or another sport, that we're going to see Tom sweating through his dress shirt? Like this means so much to him that we're seeing the sweating now coming out.
This is what I wear on the golf course for PGA Tour Radio right here. And now, granted, to be able to cover many different players on a golf course, you have to drive around in the cart. You wouldn't be able to do it any other way. However, we walk a lot, and I've got to position myself in a certain way. Now, if I'm doing a basketball or football game on television, you're confined to the space of the broadcast booth, which really makes the golf experience kind of cool in that regard, where we're just on the run the whole day. And so, yes, depending on the conditions. I was in Detroit a couple of weeks ago, and on Saturday we had temperatures in the mid 80s, high humidity, stifling heat, heavy air, which I love because that lends itself to the radio broadcast because you're feeling those conditions around you in addition to the action of the golfers that you're talking about. Then the following day it was mid 60s, which to us on the PGA Tour, and I live in South Carolina, that's cold. So you got your wind shirt on and your rain gear or whatever because of the breezes are cold and you're driving in a cart. But again, that all lends itself to the broadcast. But all those elements, try to combine all those elements in a space that has different weather conditions as opposed to being in a broadcast booth for football or basketball. Sometimes football, as we know, can get a little chilly up there, and I like to have the windows wide open so I can hear everything that's going on. Basketball, you can't beat it. You sit down for 2 hours, you know exactly what's going to happen as far as the clock is concerned and the weather conditions. Other than an unfortunate circumstance with some sort of leak somewhere, which luckily I've never had to be involved in. We have had power situations. Sure. Remember calling the ACC women's basketball tournament, and we had an ice storm that cut the power, and the folks in Greensboro did an amazing job to get us back on the air, and our own production crew and the folks at the Greensboro Coliseum. And I've been lucky enough to call that event for many, many years. And so you experience many different things over a 30-year broadcast career, but 99.9% of it has all been positive.
And I would think that if your wife were to listen to your work, it would be 99.9% positive. Is
She
that
doesn't
true?
listen anymore. She knows the drill.
Why? Okay, so let's go further into this. So, if I'm not mistaken, you guys just celebrated your 27th anniversary.
Yes, it's
Okay,
true.
okay.
In
So
May.
I do my research.
Yeah.
So how has her viewing and watching habits of you changed since the moment she met you to where you are now?
I think at first there was way more investment, like, what does this guy do? And, I've worked as a nightly sports anchor at the local, regional, and national level. I've done many different events for many different outlets and entities. I mean, you name it, ESPN, Big Ten Network, ACC, Atlantic 10. I work for Davidson College, calling their games on their television production. So it's been a wide array. NBA, Major League Baseball, Atlanta Braves, Hawks, certainly the Hornets here in town, the Carolina Panthers. I worked for them. I mean, Oklahoma City Thunder. I went out and worked for them for a year as well. Great experience. So as all that was happening in the formative years, and we're talking about the 90s and early 2000s, certainly she was consuming a lot more than that. Now the question I get is, where are you going? When are you coming back? when I come back, it's where were you? What were you doing? So as you can imagine, and she's got a lot going on. We have two children, and one's in grad school, and one's going to be a senior at the College of Charleston. The other's in grad school at the University of South Carolina. And so there's a lot going on with that as well. So it's not that the interest level has waned, it's just there's other things that
Sure.
have entered the focus over the years. But obviously, my number one supporter at all times.
Of course, and I would think that your kids are not far behind when it comes to being a support of you. How is it that you find that you're best there to show up for them? With your schedule, because you've got a lot going on, but to
Yeah.
make time for them and show up for them.
Yeah, it's a balance without question. The larger events demand being put on the schedule side by side with any assignments, graduations, anything along those lines, what have you. A few weeks ago, I went down to see my son in Columbia. He works for the single A team for the Kansas City Royals, which I can't believe. It's awesome. He's in athletic training. So he's in the South Carolina graduate program, but he's also working for the Columbia Fireflies, and he also worked with the South Carolina baseball team. And so he's kind of going down that road. And why that's incredible. And my daughter is more on the marketing side of things and working an internship up in Charlotte with somebody who I met through the ACC. So it's already started as far as the networking and connections and conversations that you have to have with people. And I've made it very clear to them, no matter what industry you're in, especially ours,
Yeah.
you want to maintain that network of contacts and communicate with those people because you're going to need them at some point in some sort of symbiotic relationship.
There's coaching trees that we hear of in college football, and then there's the Tom Wormy tree, and that might even go beyond that. How has it become that from where you're talking about getting into the business and meeting all these people and what you've built personally, but also what you've built and helped with other people in building their own careers?
Yeah, it's you just kind of get drawn into it because you hope that you had people that helped you, and so you want to offer that as well, keeping in mind that our business is just unbelievably competitive with people who want to be a part of it, and I can appreciate that. And the only thing I try to convey initially to people who are just getting started in the first few years is that you've really got to consume and be involved in as much as you possibly can because you just don't know which way that road's going to take you. I always thought I wanted to be, um, back in the day in the 90s, I had the 6 and 11 sports anchor, but I always wanted to do play by play as well. And the very first job I had provided both of those. So that was a
Wow.
really, that was, that would be in the early 90s in Worcester, Massachusetts, where I'm from. Um, there was an outlet there. And so I got to do some things in the formative days and then went off towards the more conventional affiliate anchoring in television and then got a job that led me down the play by play path, which I was never sure that was going to happen. Never mind actually going to the Syracuse campus and calling some of their games, men's and women's athletics, which I've been able to do, which is great. And the Final Four, like I told you about. And so you just don't know what the direction things are going to take you. So you got to be open to that and ready for that too, and understand what sort of preparation will go into whatever it is you end up doing, TV, radio, and all the other platforms that we have nowadays. When I was starting, it was really TV, radio. That was pretty much it. And there were not as many opportunities to do play by play as there are now with the way the schools and the conferences have their own productions and that kind of thing. So I tell anybody, I say, just go wherever you are, just go right to that university or college that's near you and see what they're doing production wise. Now, you may not be able to retire on the money that they could pay you, but the repetitions are invaluable. And luckily, that's what I was able to do in a different kind of way right from the get go. And so I was able to experience a lot of different things and I'm still willing to experience whatever might come down the line. I never thought I'd be a golf radio announcer, I can tell you that. But that appeared. And so I try to take advantage of that, and I'm doing it, still doing it some 15 years later, um, with the mindset that don't assume anything because stuff can go away very quickly, but things can appear very quickly as well. So just try to be ready for that.
There's a phrase that I've heard you in listening to you on PJ Tour Radio that I absolutely love, and it's one of your descriptors. And you said sun glistening off the iron.
Yeah. There's no detail, honest to God, in radio, and I tell this to anybody. And I was lucky enough to the Atlanta Braves called me and said, "Hey, can you do some spring training for us?" So I was thrilled because the baseball and radio and golf and whatever, if you're describing grass growing on the radio. And by the way, the grass is a detail of a baseball game or or a golf match or tournament or whatever. So I always feel like there's no detail that doesn't deserve attention if it's going to create the mental picture in the mind of the consumer, the listener, what have you. And so I love that stuff. One of my other favorite things to describe is the divots that the players take. Because to me, that tells you the whole shot. If it's a small divot, if it's a big divot, if it's in several pieces, if it's deep, if it's thin, if it goes off to the left, goes off to the right, blows behind it. I mean, this is just I can just talk divots for 3 hours if you want to. That's how much I enjoy the descriptive nature of being able to work on the radio side.
What's the biggest divot that you've taken as a golfer yourself?
It was about that long in wet conditions with a lob wedge, about an 83-yard shot. I remember it vividly. I
Wow.
used to work in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and the weather person that I worked with, he wanted to play golf all the time. So we would go before our shift and play all the time, regardless of the weather conditions. And so I remember that specifically. As far as on the PGA Tour, there's many contenders because their divots are enormous if they're trying to impart a lot of spin on the golf ball.
It's amazing how quickly you recalled that personal story. How close do you think you are to having a photographic memory?
I would hope with certain things pretty close. I mean, I think all of us to a certain extent who are in this business, especially if you're doing play by play, because you want to have that constant recall and those moments and memories that you can add to the broadcast that kind of give it perspective. And so when I'm talking about a golfer or a football game or a basketball game, hey, we had this situation a couple of years ago between these two teams. And I may even have a note when I do my basketball games, especially. I've got historical notes on the rivalry between the teams, how many times they've played, the notable events. And if it starts to match up and it's a reasonable juncture in the game to bring that up, hey, these two teams played a couple of years ago, it came right down to the final shot, and so made a buzzer beater. And I'll have that in a small notation. Now, if it's a blowout, you have that information, but you don't need it. But the key is to have it at least. And I think it applies to all the sports, regardless of the medium, just to be able to put a little perspective on it. And maybe the fan or the viewer or the listener says, "Oh yeah, I remember that," or it lends itself to the fact that these two players have come down the stretch before. These two teams have done this before, especially if they're longtime rivals and it's already built in. It happens all the time on the PGA Tour because you've got guys they've played in the final group before, they've gone head to head, or in the ACC, you've got two teams that have played for hundreds of times. And here they are again in the same scenario, be it whoever it is coming down the stretch in football, basketball, or any other sports.
Are you a history buff outside of sports, just the way that you're able to recall history in sports?
Uh, I like I like the history a lot. I think it can't hurt you to have some sort of rudimentary understanding of the history of the games that you're working on and calling. And I love it in golf, the old school stuff in golf. If I can ever bring that up, I love doing that. And again, to provide some perspective, to whatever event it is that I'm calling or watching or talking about or whatever. But I do love, like, if you've got just off the top of my head, if you've got two teams, and I love when we're doing out of conference games, and you've got two teams that maybe haven't played in a long time, but they played back in the 50s in the NCAA tournament. Believe me, I will go out of my way to involve that little, and I like to call them nuggets. And I say that so often in our production meetings that my producers will say, "Oh, nice nugget," to me specifically, in the communication in the headset or the IFB, the talk back communication of the truck. I love nuggets. Just sprinkle, not a whole bag of them, just sprinkled in the right spot. And I think that that's what you'll see in any event that's done well, is that you're not overloaded necessarily. You're just given a little nugget here and there to chew on while you're watching the action unfold. And when the viewer or listener doesn't even realize it, that's when it's done at its very best. Because I consider play-by-play to be an art form, because there's a way to do it where it's digestible to the viewer, and then there's overloading and things that are out of context and that sort of stuff. And so television, I've never had somebody say to me after a television broadcast, you didn't talk enough during the game. I don't think that's been said very often to announcers who've done all this research and want to inject all that. And that's great for the right moment at the right time.
Yeah.
I think that's when it's done properly. And I'm always striving for that myself.
It takes great discernment on your part to be able to do that. Final question for me. Tom Warme is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. You're talking about different nuggets. A nugget about your story. So I see you've got the bracelet on the right side. What does that symbolize on your right
This
hand? Yeah.
this is just to kind of remind me to think about other things and not be so immersed in what I'm doing all the time. And I usually wear it while I'm golfing. And it
Wow.
doesn't even have to be this one. It just needs to be something, whether my kids gave me one. I try to wear one all the time because it makes me slow down for a minute, because I'm all between trying to get events for myself and fill my own calendar and work with my clients on my representation side and work with my play-by-play and analyst people that I work with on the consulting side. It's just a reminder to stop for a second and maybe go hit a few shots into the net that I have in my garage for full swing golf repetitions, and go hit a few chips or whatever, just to slow down for a second. And then we dive right back into it. Believe me, I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about stuff that I want to do, either in my own work or to help somebody else out. It happens constantly. And I think it's a good thing just to every once in a while have ideas, because when ideas start, they're really kind of out of nowhere, and you just have to kind of take that seed, plant it, and cultivate it and see where it goes.
That's what makes you great, is being able to have these ideas and then the racing thoughts that come with it. That is what makes
Yeah,
Tom Warme Tom Warme. And that was what I
yeah.
was hoping to accomplish in this conversation where, hey, maybe this was a 20-minute plus chance for you to slow down a little bit and reflect, just sort
Yeah,
of
but
like
I'm
you're
still thinking of ideas as we're talking. I'm thinking about things like what you said, like, "Oh, I like that. I'm gonna try to work that into something else and see
yeah.
if that develops." And you really think at some point you'll get to a point you're like, "Okay, I'm good. I can kick back." And I don't see that ever happening. It's just because you're constantly being inspired by whoever, whenever. It doesn't matter. Like, we don't consume TV like everybody else. I see things on even shows that are not sports that give me ideas about other things. And so it's a constant kind of evaluation and consumption of things that could turn into great ideas. Now, the percentage that actually do, it's small, but it's there, and it's a constant involvement in my surroundings.
It's art, it's creativity, and through those ideas that you're chasing, you're able to manifest that in your broadcast. And I hope we were able to show that front and center in this conversation. Tom Warme, I'm Bryan Fenley. Tom, thanks so much, man. This was a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Brian.